George Zimmerman's defense team could wrap up their case this afternoon. Today's sole witness has been Dennis Root, a security expert who contacted Mark O'Mara and asked to be an expert witness in the case. Root told jurors that in his opinion, George Zimmerman would, quote, find himself lacking during a physical altercation with Trayvon Martin in February 2012. Joining us now is NBC's Craig Melvin, live in Sanford, MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Bloom, and Professor Jelani Cobb, following the as a contributor for The New Yorker. Professor Cobb, thanks so much for joining us today. From what you've seen so far with the defense about to rest its case, how do you assess how this trial has gone so far from the standpoint of the prosecution and the defense?
I mean, I think there was kind of an arc to the prosecution's arguments. They started off strong, and then toward the middle of their presentations, seemed to kind of lose their way, and then they closed with a series of really important points, but you kind of wondered if they got lost in the fray of everything that was going on. The defense, I think, has been much more disciplined, much more focused, and brought kind of much more of a has done a better job of poking holes in the prosecution's argument, if I'm being quite honest.
And Lisa Bloom, after the defense rests, what are we going to see from the prosecution side? Will there be some redirects?
The prosecution has an opportunity to put on a rebuttal case. We don't get to know any of the witnesses in advance, so we don't know what they're going to put on. The defense would then have a chance to put on a rebuttal case as long as those witnesses were in the scope of the rebuttal case. After all that shakes down, I expect to hear the judge charge the jury with the law that they have to follow in the case, then closing arguments, and then deliberations.
And Craig Melvin, down there in Florida, I know as the court is about to resume and they're coming into the courtroom today, there's a lot of anticipation as to these closing days, really, in this emotional case.
A great deal of anticipation, Andrew Mitchell. Dennis Root, by the way, when he takes the stand, he's going to be the witness that takes the stand here in just a moment on redirect. We've been keeping a close eye on how jurors have been reacting to certain witnesses, how jurors have been reacting to certain pieces of testimony, and the point where John Guy was demonstrating with the dummy earlier, that seemed to go over reasonably well with the jury. At one point, all of the jurors in the back row were standing up and looking. They were quite engaged. But, Dennis Root has been on the stand for about 3 hours now, close to 3 hours. So we do not expect him to be on the stand that much longer.
And of course, Dennis Root offered himself up to the defense team. He is, an experienced trainer, an instructor of trainers, but he does not know George Zimmerman. So he's really just offering himself up as an expert witness on the physical strength or lack of strength of Zimmerman. Lisa Bloom, at this stage, do you think that the defense has presented a case, no need of extra witnesses?
I think the defense has done an extremely good job in this case. They have two extremely skilled attorneys who have put on a couple of expert witnesses, have overcome a lot of objections, and have really put forward all possible evidence to support George Zimmerman's claim of self-defense. I think the prosecution has put a lot in, though, as well, and the case is just too close to call if it was going to the jury right now. The prosecution has a more difficult case because they have to connect a lot of small points together in closing argument. We haven't gotten there yet. I mean, their case is essentially that George Zimmerman lied and misstated the evidence when he told his 4 or 5 stories to law enforcement, and they've put on a lot of witnesses to point out a little hole here, a little misstatement there. They need to bring it all together for the jury if they can.
And Jelani Cobb, one of the things that happened earlier today was that the judge made clear to George Zimmerman that he does have the right to testify if he wants to. This out of the...
Unless he thought that the prosecution had essentially made their case. And I don't suspect he's going to be doing that. The other thing is that, they've been really successful at having George Zimmerman testify without testifying. They've used the video, they've used, statements that he's used. They even showed the interview that he did with Fox News. And so I think that's been their way of getting his perspective in without having him on the witness stand.
And how big a deal was it that the defense was unable to get into testimony, direct testimony? They can do it during closing, apparently. The animation that one of their experts had put together?
Oh, you asking that's me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I thought that was a little bit odd because when you saw the session where they interviewed the actual animator, it really seemed like he was taking a good deal of creative license in creating it, and so they said that he wouldn't be able to use evidence, but they could use it as a demonstration. I don't know what that will actually mean to the jury itself, but it was a bit open to interpretation in terms of what he was going to be showing on the actual animation itself.
And the judge is right now talking to George Zimmerman about his right to testify. Let's listen in.
Talk to your attorneys about whether or not you want to testify in this case.
Yes, sir.
Do you need some more time to talk to your attorneys about that?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, and if you'll please just raise your right hand for one moment.
You solemnly swear affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Zimmerman, like I said before, you're aware that during this trial you have the absolute right to remain silent. You do not have to say anything, do anything, or prove anything. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And you also have the right to testify if you want to. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
And I've given you an opportunity to discuss with your attorneys whether or not you want to testify in this case, and you have indicated that you have had those discussions.
Yes, Your Honor.
And have you made a decision, sir, as to whether or not you want to testify
Your
in
Honor,
this case?
I object to that question.
Okay, overruled. Have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in the case?
I object to that question. I think that's Mr.
Overruled. The court is entitled to inquire of Mr. Zimmerman's determination as to whether or not he wants to testify. Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
No, not at this time, Your Honor.
Okay, and when is it that how long do you think you need before you make that decision?
Your Honor, may we have an opportunity to speak? The case isn't concluded yet.
I understand that, and I've asked Mr. Zimmerman if he needed more time to talk to his attorneys, and if he does, I will afford it to him. Mr. Zimmerman, how much more time do you think you're going to need to discuss this with your attorneys?
I assume it would depend on how long the recesses are, Your Honor. At the end of the day.
Okay, well, if your attorneys have finished with 2 witnesses before the end of the day, do you think that you would then know whether or not you want to testify?
Your Honor, on Mr. Zimmerman's behalf, that
I am
decision...
asking your client questions. Please, Mr. West.
I object to the court inquiring of Mr. Zimmerman as to his decision about whether or not to testify.
Your objection is overruled. Mr. Zimmerman, I will give you more time, sir, to discuss this with your attorneys. Thank you very much.
Approach on an unrelated matter from...
Yes, you may.
As you just saw that dramatic moment, the judge asking of George Zimmerman whether he has made his decision and whether he needs more time and more conversation with his attorneys, and over the serial objections of the defense attorney. She overruled those objections. Lisa Bloom, it was very clear that she was out of patience with the defense objections to her direct questioning of George Zimmerman.
Wow, what you just saw in that Florida courtroom was extraordinary. Usually this is a pro forma event. The defendant announces he's not going to testify. Then the judge just asks him a series of questions as if by rote. You understand you have the right? Yes. You are waiving that right? Yes. You've had a chance to speak with your attorney and confer, and you're making this decision of your own free will voluntarily. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you very much. You sit down. That's what I was expecting. This was completely different. I mean, he seemed to be hedging. The defense attorney is objecting to the judge's questions. You don't get to object to the judge's questions. You object to the other side's questions. She keeps saying overruled. Zimmerman looked confused by the questions. She's offering him more time. Ultimately, he says, well, I guess I need to the end of the day. I mean, that was really bizarre.
I couldn't figure it out either, because usually, as you point out, you're the lawyer, I'm not, but it's the objection to what the prosecution or the opponent is doing, the adversary, not to the judge's ruling. And she made it very clear. She wanted this opportunity to put it on the record that she was asking George Zimmerman and giving him the option of explaining that he really understood that he had the right to testify and he had the right not to testify. Craig Melvin, that was a dramatic moment indeed down there.
You know what, Andrea? It was a dramatic moment, but one could argue that the seeds for that moment were planted late last night inside that courtroom. You know, they spent 13 and a half hours in court yesterday, the longest day of this trial so far, and it ended with Judge Nelson storming out of the courtroom as Don West was in mid-sentence. Don West last night was complaining about the pace and the speed at which this trial is going. Judge West, of course, has made no secret about the fact that she wants to move it along. She's got a jury that's been sequestered, and she wants to get this thing to that jury, to get the case to the jury as quickly as possible. But again, last night, Don West was going on, and Judge Nelson decided she'd had enough, didn't let him finish, stood up, walked out, and then after that, the cameras were off. After that, John Guy, attorney for the state, goes over to the other attorney's table to demand an apology from Don West. He wanted Don West to apologize for implying that the state was withholding some evidence. He goes over, he's between Marco Mary, he's between Don West. He's like, you should apologize for something that you said. And Don West apparently looks up at one point and raises his voice and said, no, I'm not apologizing. At that point, some sheriff's deputies have to come down and kindly ask the attorneys to leave the courtroom. So tensions appear to be getting a bit frayed here in Sanford, Florida, on both sides.
Well, Lisa, you've been in a number of trials. You know that after a long trial, and especially one with the stakes as high as this on a national stage, that those relationships do get frayed. They've been working pretty hard.
Yeah, look, these are not best friends, and they're on both sides of, obviously, the most high-profile case in the country right now, where tensions run high, where a lot is wrong on this case for a number of people. It's understandable, and they are working very, very long hours. What you see is probably only half of their day. They have to go back to their offices and work many more hours. They're probably getting hate mail. I mean, you know, this is a very, very tough thing for everybody in that courtroom.
Well, to Lisa Bloom, our thanks, and we will, of course, continue with live coverage. And to Craig Melvin and Jelani Cobb, thanks to all.